This episode is brought to you by Peacock. The new Peacock original documentary, Matthew Perry, A Hollywood Tragedy, dives deep into the beloved actor's rise to fame and his tragic death. 5 people, including Perry's personal assistant, 2 medical doctors, and an alleged Hollywood drug dealer known as the Ketamine Queen, were charged with conspiracy to illegally provide Perry with the ketamine. Explore the details of the case in this heartbreaking special, streaming now only on Peacock.
Are you ready to sign up for our Life and Leadership newsletter? Text the word values to 66866 and get signed up for great content coming to your inbox every single Wednesday. Again, text the word values to 66866. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Follow the Lead podcast, a Christian Leaders podcast. And today on the podcast, I'm so excited to give you a little bonus audio. Bonus audio is when I take an interview that I've done somewhere else and I bring it over because I know that you need to hear it. Today on the podcast, Justin Gravitt and I interview my lead pastor, the good Reverend David Holmes. Dave is one of my favorite leaders. He does an incredible job of leading our church, and I'm so thankful to be on the team with him. In today's conversation, we talk about what it means to create a disciple-making culture in the church and leading through that. And that whole process was so good that I thought you might enjoy it. As always, I'm so thankful for our sponsors. If you haven't checked out Greg Fay Insurance, do so today. Go to gregfayinsurance.com. And now, without any further ado, here's my conversation with Justin Gravitt and Dave Holmes. Special episode today because we have a guest. Justin, why don't you tell us who our special guest is?
Yeah, our special guest is Pastor Dave Holmes from Centerville Grace Church in Dayton, Ohio. Tony and I have been talking about having him on for a while. And you know, as listeners, we don't normally have guests on. So when we do, you know it's going to be an awesome episode. So Pastor Dave Holmes, I've known him for about 10 years now. He hails from Wooster, Ohio, which I learned from him that it's not Wooster, as it is spelled. But if you're local, if you're in the know, it's Wooster, Ohio. And so Pastor Dave is here, and he's going to be sharing with us about disciple making, his journey of disciple making, and how it's impacted not only him, but his church and the way he pastors.
One of the cool parts about this for me is that I get to serve on a team with Pastor Dave. He's my lead pastor. I serve as the associate pastor of disciple making, and came here. It's been 2 years now, Dave?
Yeah.
Just about, yeah. So I've been a tremendous kind of journey together. So let's kind of jump in to your initial kind of step into disciple making. When did you realize that you needed to change the paradigm around disciple making here at Grace?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me on, guys. This is so much fun. I have high respect for both of you guys and your disciple making heart and abilities. And so it started really with relationship with Justin, and prior to that, it was all about the idea of maybe mentoring at best guys, helping them maybe deal with their problems, but Justin just kind of opened the door to this whole new Jesus-style disciple making. It was like, yeah, of course, that just seems to make sense after I walked through that door. But it was kind of eye-opening to realize, wow, I've been missing out on all this time with our church and with myself personally. And so when he introduced me to that kind of style of disciple making where it's personal and intentional and relational, it just kind of took off as far as like, I wanted this to be in our church. I wanted this to be something that everybody in our church is moving towards. And that's what has been our goal for the last almost 10 years now, of trying to move people, create a current in our culture where they're moving towards disciple making.
Dave, that's really cool to hear. Can you orient us a little bit towards kind of where you were in life when you heard about that, when you and I started meeting and talking about it, and kind of what had been your experience just as a believer before that?
Yeah, so I grew up at a church called Wooster Grace. It was a fairly large church in the area, and very solid on the Bible, very solid on programming and classes, and they not really pride themselves, but they do have an excellent, like Sunday school model of teaching and discipleship. And so that's the culture I grew up in. I went to college and seminary at Grace College and Seminary, and I had incredible mentors, professors, and pastors who would pour into me on a kind of a need basis, where if I had a problem, I'd go to them and they'd kind of do a Yoda thing with me and tell me where to go and what to do and what not to do. And I listened, and that was great and wonderful. But there was nobody that was actually walking with me intentionally, helping me not only learn how to be a disciple, but how to make disciples. And so when I got here at Centerville Grace, I kind of just took the model that I had in my mind from Worcester Grace and started doing that here. That's what we often do. We just kind of do what we know. And I did that for several years. And, we had some growth from that. We were an older church when I got here. My wife and I were the only 20-somethings, and our first baby was the only baby in the nursery.
Wow.
Yeah, and he got doted on like crazy, by the way, by all the grandmothers and grandfathers. But it really, again, it wasn't until I met with Justin, realizing, there was something missing. I knew there was something missing prior to our time together. We had changed our large group format, our Sunday morning format. We changed our ABF, or adult Sunday school model, into more of a small group model in Holmes. But there was still something missing as far as the development of a individual disciple into a disciple maker. And so when Justin came and kind of walked me through what disciple making looks like, I was like, yes, that's what we were missing.
I think that's a story that a lot of our listeners can relate to. And one of the things that's interesting about where you are in the journey is that when you started to where you are now, you met Justin now almost halfway through.
Yeah.
Right. So I wonder if you could speak to the tension that you felt about changing the culture. I think that there are a lot of pastors and church leaders listening, easy for me to say, pastors and church leaders listening who struggle with changing the culture of the church. What were some of your growing pains, some of the things you learned, if there was a specific story around changing culture that was like that moment where you knew you were on the other side of the hill? Could you share any of that?
Yeah, changing a church in any church is hard.
Preach.
It is hard. And fortunately, we had already gone through a series of changes that taking an older, dying church and helping it to revitalize it and change the culture of it. We had already started with that. And so by the time Justin showed up, they were a little bit more used to change than they were at the beginning, but still, even just the terminology. What does it mean to be a disciple? What does it mean to be what is discipleship? What is disciple making? Those terms were very vague, and across the board, there was just a spectrum of answers of what they would say was what a disciple is and what is disciple making. And so having to, just start there and just starting to help them understand what we mean and what we don't mean. That was a process. We did sermon series, we did testimonials. And, people are really resistant to this idea of giving up programming and giving up even just like classes. Like they just want those kind of things. At least they think they do at the beginning, right? And then until they realize they get into a relationship, like, where have you been all my life? But the classes and the programmings were hard to give up. And just kind of the destructuring of our church, helping it become more organic, trying to push people towards relationships. Our people are pretty introverted. We have a majority of introverts in our church. And so the idea of having them go and talk to somebody else about getting into a disciple-making relationship was a challenge for sure. A lot of people just didn't feel ready or prepared or equipped. So it just took a while to give the confidence, to give the in equipping. We did some equipping. We created some core teams that started this whole process, and we can get into more of that, what those were. But the culture change, and there's still a little bit of pushback. I mean, we're not there. I don't want to make it sound like we're this perfect culture of disciple making. We still have people. I still have guys coming up to me and just saying, I don't think this is what we're supposed to be doing. I don't think we're called to be disciples who make disciples. I think that's what the original 12 were called to do, but not me. And so we have those conversations, and I welcome those conversations. I think it's an opportunity to disciple them in a way of helping them understand the scriptures. And I think so. it's not easy, but we've turned some corners, and I'm excited about where we're going. We have probably 50 to 60 people in disciple making relationships now, and the people who are in it, I think, really are enjoying it.
I think one of the beautiful parts is they get the vision of it.
They do.
That's the thing, is that there's deep rooted vision that is a testament to the work that you've done over the last 10 years. So I think that's really where the momentum is.
I think that's one of the amazing things about culture building and culture change, right? Is that it's never done.
Yeah.
Right. We're always trying to move it forward. And at the moment we stop or say, yeah, we've done it, it's there, then we're going to start to lose ground. And so just what you're saying is, you're still moving forward, still trying to get it to saturate the culture as a whole. I mean, that's really normal. I wonder if you could share a little bit more about the process, right? So it started with you, right? And I remember early on there was, hey, let's get this into the church, get into the church. And I was like, okay, yeah, but, we got to start with you. And we have to start working through who are you discipling, all that sort of stuff. But can you share with us a little bit about how it moved from you into the culture? Like you mentioned core teams, and kind of what was the process that you went through and that the church went through, really?
Yep. So the process started with you and me meeting, along with some of our staff, for a period of time. And then eventually, once I began to really catch the vision for it, then you encouraged me to go and find a cross-section of our church, a healthy cross-section of 8 to 10 people who could begin to, again, develop the heart vision skill of disciple making themselves. And so this core team, the first round of it, we've had a few iterations of it. The first iteration involved some of our staff, some of our elders, and it was about a 1.5-year process of meeting every other week. We just kind of shared with them some tools, tips, and helping them catch the vision. And so we sent them out, part of the process of a core team. About halfway through our 1.5 years, we go tell them, now you need to go find somebody. And the rest of our time together is going to be more on coaching and how to disciple them and answer any questions you have, because they're always going to have questions on coming back if they're new at this. So we did that, and I batted about maybe 50%,
500, that's
maybe
pretty
500,
good.
400%.
That'll get you in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, Hall of Famer over here.
Not everybody who went through the core team decided to accept that vision and take up that calling. And so that was a little disappointing, but I learned some things, and we ended up doing another iteration of that maybe a year or two after the first one was over. And again, we had about half start discipling. So now we have maybe 10 people in our church discipling. So this is like year 3 or 4 or 5 now. Mm-hmm. And we just it was so slow. It's so slow.
It's so slow.
But it's good, slow growth. And it's those who are in it are committed and are doing it. And then they started discipling. It really, the first iteration took off in our youth at that time. And you can understand why our youth are, they're so much more teachable. They're available. They're, just like sponges. And so they're just really relationally driven. So the idea of having somebody invest in them and want to spend time with them, that was something that was very attractive. And so it kind of took off more in our youth at that time than it did in the rest of the church. And so that was really encouraging to see. And I saw the potential of that, right? It's like, wow, that can just catch like fire. And so we did 2 iterations of the core team, the way that Justin kind of showed me how to do it with the Navigators model, the Navigators Church Ministry model. And then after that, we had about 10 or so that we kind of developed into the new core team, where they're helping me now change the culture of our church. So they're discipling, and now they're helping me beat the drum of disciple making, on a week-to-week basis.
So what were some of those lessons that you learned over the process of doing those 2-3 core teams that you think would be important for a pastor that's just starting out on this journey, that's, thinking about doing core team number 1 in his church? What would be some of the things that you would want to pass on to him?
Yeah, as you really want this going in your church, but you have to understand it's going to take a lot of time, and we're going for quality rather than quantity right now. If you really want to lay a good foundation, you want quality. So choosing maybe less people, I chose like 10, and that was a lot. And I would maybe have gone down to like 6, just so I can spend more time individually with each one of them and model the relational side. Because when you're in a core team, it's more of the intentional, informational side of disciple making, and you're not doing necessarily to have the one-on-one opportunities in the team settings. So you need to do that out of the team settings to meet more with them. And so, I was having twins, and and it was just a crazy
Tons of time.
Season of life where I didn't have much time. But I would encourage to think less, think quantity, quality over quantity, and really model the relational side along with the intentional side if you're doing a core team model.
How has your personal disciple making changed over the 10 years, right? Like, I would imagine early on you probably misstepped in some ways or did some things that you wouldn't do now. I'm wondering if you could kind of give us a little background look on where you were versus where you are.
It's like anything. If you're learning something new, you tend to lean on the very concrete examples that were given to you. So the beginning was I felt like I needed to do it exactly the way Justin did it with me, and do the exact same tools and the same rhythm, just everything exactly. Now I took a lot, and I still do a lot, but over the time, just like learning like piano, you tend to learn to just do a little free flow on the piano.
Noodling.
A little noodling, if you will, on the piano. And so that's something, because I think it's an art more than a science, disciple making. And so you have to learn just the art of it yourself. And everybody's different. And that's another thing I learned. Everybody's coming in a different spot, a different place in their journey of faith. And so packing your toolbox as best as you can for the journey. But, it's all about an art of dancing with this person and helping them, meeting them where they're at and helping them get to a stronger place in their faith with Christ.
Yeah, I think that's so important, because often we go in the ways that we've grown in.
Exactly.
Right? And so that's what I hear you saying. Early on, that's what you were doing. That's what almost all of us tend to do. But for me, what I'm sometimes sad about, or I don't know, that's not the right word, but I wish that more people had the vision of what you just said, right? That, okay, I can start here, but the goal is I want to progress to a place where I'm doing it out of a style that's my own. I'm doing it out of the giftings that God has gifted me in, because God's not gifted me in the exact way he's gifted you.
Yeah.
Right? And so if we're discipling out of who we are, and we're continually becoming more and more of who Jesus has created us to be, then that should impact our disciple making. Right? But if we're only doing it in a formulaic way, or a science rather than an art sort of way, then we're going to disciple person 20 the same way we discipled person 2. And I just don't think that's how God intended it.
Right.
And so I love hearing that. Love hearing how that has progressed in you. And I've seen it too, right? To the point where, you are now developing tools of your own.
Yeah.
And, illustrations of your own. And so I'm just really excited. Love that has been a part of your journey.
Yeah.
One of the things that's interesting about this kind of development is that every time that you add people to the church, the culture changes, right? And we were kind of talking about that. And so one of the ways that we combat that, and that we encourage churches to combat that, is with a discipleship pathway. And I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about kind of what our discipleship pathway looks like at Grace now, and kind of how we've created some, kind of banks to the discipleship river where we try to get people flowing in.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the strategic decisions we made was bringing you on as a big cheerleader of disciple making. And that was super helpful in the process of working and developing a pathway. And so me, you, and our worship pastor, Dusty, kind of sat down, and we were kind of working and reworking, what is the best path in a way to help the most people get into a disciple-making relationship? We want everything basically to funnel eventually into a place where they're offered a chance to disciple somebody and be discipled. So for our pathways, it starts with, on stage on Sunday mornings, we're talking about disciple making. We're, having testimonies up on stage about people's relationships, and how effective disciple making is, and growth and multiplication. We are talking about it in our first environment. If you're new, we invite you to an environment called New to Grace. And right there, we're talking about disciple making. We're saying, ultimately, this is what we do as a church. We make disciple makers. That's our motto at our church, is we make disciple makers. And so we aren't ashamed of that. We don't hide that for the first 6 months until we're right up front. This is what we're about. This is where we're going. This is what we believe God's vision and plan is to reach the nations with. And if you're on board, great. If you're not, well, there's probably 100 other churches within a 10-minute radius around here that might be better fit for you. Right. And we would love everyone to stick around, but we just want to know that this is our vision and mission. And we want to take, part of our vision statement is take ordinary church attenders, because that's usually who we get, and turn them into extraordinary disciple makers. And so we lay that vision out.
Say that one more time, because I think it's so good.
We want to take ordinary church attenders and see them become extraordinary disciple makers. That's what our vision, our mission is. And we encourage them right up front. If you're ready, if you feel like if you're ready to be discipled, we want to know that, and we want to offer a chance to help you get paired up with somebody. So we are constantly pointing people to basically our website, where they can sign up and raise their hand, and we try to do matchmaking. Now, we don't always get it right, and we can't always matchmake, but we just say, we love to help in that process. But if you know of somebody in our church that you look up to and would love for them to disciple you, man, go ahead and go ask them. You don't need our permission. You don't need anything, but we would love to help you if that's a hard ask. So from there, from New to Grace, we have a 4-week class that I'm actually hosting right now at our house called Discover Grace. And every week we're mentioning disciple making one way or the other. When we're talking about identity, we're talking about your identity is a disciple of Jesus. That's who you are if you said yes to Jesus. And disciples make disciples who make disciples. After our 4-week class, where we're talking about identity and passion and belonging and mission, we have a 2-week disciple making 101, 201 crash course to help get people understanding a little bit more, again, what we're talking about, and again, funneling them into relations. That's what we're always trying to do, is funnel people into relationships. So we're having to produce disciple makers, and the more that we have, the more then we can get them connected to people in our church and outside our church.
Watch the world's biggest tennis stars clash in the California desert at the BNP Paribas Open, live on Tennis Channel.
How do they get to these shots?
Tune in daily for exclusive first ball to last coverage from Indian Wells, and witness all of the jaw-dropping action as the game's top men and women square off at one of the greatest events in sports. It's tennis magic you need to see to believe. The BNP Paribas Open, live on Tennis Channel and streaming on the Tennis Channel app.
So what I hear you saying, Dave, is that you are really being intentional about kind of folding disciple making into every aspect, every segment of the church,
every level, every ministry, from youth, teenagers to our 50s and up. They know we want you. If you're getting together because you're creating an environment where people can get together to join it, get into a disciple making relationship.
Right.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So one of the questions that I will often get is how do you do that more and more? How do you know that disciple making is a hallmark or a part of the culture? And specifically, I'm asked often about leadership and how do you get leadership on board with disciple making? So I'm wondering if there's anything you can share over the journey that you guys have been on here at Centerville Grace about two things, both folding that into the culture, but also specifically about leadership, thinking about staff, thinking about elders. How has that process been for you guys?
Yeah, it's been partly taking, because we didn't just show up with nothing here. We had an existing church, we had existing elder board, we had existing leaders, and the first step was trying to grandfather people in the sense of, hey, we're inviting you into this. That I know you're already doing things, but we want you to shift your focus onto disciple making. And for those who do, that's great, and you can keep running with us. But over time, this is where we're headed, and the further we head in the direction of disciple making, and the less they are on board on disciple making, there's a gap that begins. You just feel it and sense it, and over time, people don't just stay with us, because they know where we're going. And so that gives us an opportunity to take on new staff and new leadership. And so every staff hire and every elder, candidate that we look at, we're asking the question, do they share the vision of disciple making with us? And if so, great, they can run with us. If not, maybe again, this is not the church for them. So,
and I think one of the things that does really beautifully is that it gives disciple making the opportunity to exist at every level.
Yep.
And so one of the things I'm so proud of about being in this community is that my middle son Caleb is currently being discipled in a triad, and he's in the Word and meeting with someone every other week intentionally to make disciples. And now he's not quite to the point where he's catching that vision of multiplication, which is obviously where we want him to go. But at 13, the fact that he's already living into this, by the time he gets to 16, 17, 18, he'll have the tools to make disciples. And there's nothing that makes me happier as a dad than hearing my son talk about what the Word of God means to him and that relationship with the Lord and how that begins to, and it's, for me, that's one of the reasons, that's one of my whys when it comes to disciple making, is that I want those spiritual descendants to outnumber the stars. So if I can disciple someone who might eventually disciple my son, and that so on and so forth, that becomes a really beautiful thing.
Yeah, one of the things too that I remember you said to me one time, and I don't know if it's still in the ecosystem here, but you said you wanted to move towards having your decision makers become disciple makers.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Can you talk a little bit about that and kind of the etymology of that? Where did that thought come from, and how has it impacted not only you, but the culture here?
Yeah. Again, if you're heading in a certain direction, you want your leaders all rowing in the same direction as you are, right? And so when it comes to our leadership and our decision makers, if they are not disciple makers, they're going to be rowing, whether they realize it or not. It could be a slight off or it could be a big time off, but there's going to be friction and there's going to be tension along the way. And so we really want our decision makers from, again, every sphere of our church, body to organization. It's just, we want them to be disciple makers so that when they're making decisions, they're making it through that lens versus a million other lenses they could be looking at.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I wonder if you could share a little bit. So far we've been talking about disciple making inside the church, right? Inside the culture of the church. Can you share a little bit, how has that impacted the community around you, whether it's, neighborhood, whether it's, people in their workplaces? Do you have any thoughts or stories that you can share about how has that been happening now, and kind of, even if, you see on the horizon even more, what's been the case for you guys?
Yeah, again, one of the many positives of moving in this direction is when you're helping people think in terms of disciple making, they are naturally going to, over time, become more relational and focus on relationships. And so our people who have gone and been discipled and are making disciples, they are far more outreach focused and relational focused than they were previously. So that just, anytime we have an event at our church, or I hear stories of them at work or in their neighborhoods, we really push neighborhood ministry here, our outreach evangelism in our neighborhoods. And they develop a heart and a set of eyes for the lost that they did not have before. Now, that takes a lot of time. We're still early on that process of moving outward. A lot of our focus has been getting people in disciple-making relationships within the church, but the next move is really pushing outward and helping people go, okay, what does disciple-making look like in my neighborhood, in my office, maybe on my sports team, maybe in the classroom, and just thinking outside the church environment is the next big push.
One of the things that's interesting about that outward-facing posture is that you kind of give up the process of saying the end result is not about bringing people to church,
Right.
but it's about making disciples.
Yeah.
That's a very different heartbeat than I think what I grew up with in the church, and probably you as well. What was that shift like for you to say, hey, I'm going to be less concerned about this particular building and more concerned about the kingdom of God?
Yeah. And maybe this has just been the journey for me, but it's like, yes, church is important. Yes, Sunday mornings are important. Yes, it's my job. Yes, there's that whole job part of it. There's the whole, caring for the flock that you have piece of it. But just having a set of eyes that look outward and go, it's got to be more than this, guys. It's got to be way more than this. And whether everyone who gets discipled from our people come to our church or not, that's not the win. That's not the win. Growing a bigger church is not the win anymore. The win is making disciples who make disciples. And when you can make that shift, you kind of have open hands with your church and go, okay, it may not be a mega church because we're not, steering everybody back here. And that's okay. I don't need to be a mega church. I'd rather have mega disciple makers than a mega church.
Mega impact.
Yeah, amen.
Yeah.
Amen. Justin teased at it a little bit earlier, but I think I would be remiss if we did not share your tool with the Practitioner Podcast family.
Okay.
And so can you take them through the Prism?
The Prism with an M.
Prism.
So I was on the beach and I was thinking about this. I don't know why I was thinking about this on the beach, but when you're a disciple maker,
It's just
it
takes you everywhere you go.
just
That's
a
what I
part of
think
you
about
now,
on the beach.
right? So just coming up with a way to describe Jesus-style disciple making, because there's so many facets to it and there's so many beautiful colors to it. It's kind of like when a light hits a prism, it creates a spectrum of color. And so when you think about that, the prism then becomes P stands for being personal. R it used to be relational, and now we changed it to reproducible. So that was a Tony add-on. So I want to give credit to that.
Well,
so
thank you.
personal, reproducible. I is intentional. S is sacrificial, and M is missional. And that's kind of the beautiful facets of disciple making, that when you put all that together, it's very powerful.
And I think, one of the things we say around here is intentional, relational, reproducible. So I know that our podcast family has heard us say that, but the idea of sacrificial and missional, I think, are two facets that you really have influenced me on when it comes to disciple making. And I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about your heart for what does sacrificial look like and what does missional look like? Because I do think those are important words. I love the tool because it gives a fullness to the vision of disciple making in a different way.
Yeah, well, Jesus said, if you want to, come after me, you got to, lay down your life and, pick up your cross and follow me. It's sacrificial, and it's so time consuming. Like you're gonna have to give up your time, your energy, some relational, maybe equity or, space in other places to invest into new people. And there's just a lot of sacrifices that the call to Jesus, being obedient and then investing in other people, it can take a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of emotional energy. It's not always easy. It doesn't always go the way that you want. It's frustrating. And just realizing there's a sacrifice to it. There's a cost to it, but you're glad to give up that cost.
Yeah, it reminds me of John 12:24. It says, unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds. And so that verse kind of has both of those in there, right?
Exactly.
That sacrificial, but also the missional, the multiplicative effect that disciple making can have. I really love the prism, again, with an M illustration. And we're working on developing that so that we can kind of send it out visually to the world. And so in the first steps of that, but hopefully in the next few months, we'll have that cleaned up and finished so that we can get it out to you guys, maybe even in time for the release of this podcast. Who knows? Dave, could you share a little bit about kind of what are you trusting God for? What do you see in the future for Centerville Grace, for disciple-making culture here? Another way to ask that same question is, what are the kind of the current challenges that you're facing that you guys are kind of leaning into and trying to push forward?
Yeah, I think we have the same challenges that probably 99% of other churches have. as far as just people, how much time they give to their faith and their desire to want to grow. And actually, our theme this year is Formed in 24, and our tagline is Becoming Like Jesus Takes Practice. So we're trying to develop spiritual practices for people to help them introduce them to maybe new practices they've never even thought about before. But the challenge is always helping them, again, going back to identity, seeing themselves as a disciple, not just a church goer or attender or even just a Christian, but a disciple who is committed to following Jesus and becoming like him and doing what he did. And Tony can speak on this too, as far as what challenges we're seeing, but that's a big one for, at least in my first thought about that. What about you?
Yeah, well, I think our church is in a really interesting place in its growth cycle, right? And so if churches are, kind of model what we see in adolescence, I would say that we're teenagers.
Yeah.
We're not a small church. We're not young. We're not an old church. We're right in that middle part, which means that we're a little awkward and sometimes smelly. And so when you have that kind of growth, like we've had a growth spurt and new people have come to the church, which is awesome. But that means every time that happens, you have to reshift the culture. You have to get back to it. And so for the people that have been here for a long time, it feels like, man, all they ever do is talk about disciple making. And for the people that are new, they're like, what's disciple making? I just want to hear a good sermon and leave. And so we're constantly bumping up against that tension, I think, as a church team, right? Our servant leadership team here. And so I think that's one of the growth issues that, every church is going to have, and we certainly are facing, and we're trying to do our best to create opportunities. And luckily, we have a great core team. Yeah. Right. And so the core team really helps us. And, we're trying to be intentional about putting stories on the platform and also finding ways for people to connect, and just that whole process of leaning into how do we make it that much easier for people to get their eyes focused on disciple making.
Yeah, I would say relationships are a challenge, just forming new relationships. Our church, I think, needs to work on what I call micro connections. And just if you think of a tree and the root system in that under the surface, and you might have a good looking tree and see some fruit, but what's the root system look like, and how well is everything connected? So I think our challenge is because we have had a lot of new people helping people get connected, just being familiar with each other, knowing their names, those micro connections, I think, go a long way as far as then leading into more disciple-making relationships.
That's really cool. Dave, as I sit here and listen to you and I hear the journey that you guys have been on for so long, this question has occurred to me, right? So as a pastor, as a lead pastor, you've been at this for a while. You've been pastoring for a while.
Yeah.
To what degree has disciple making impacted your job as a pastor? How has it impacted it? Has it made your job easier? Has it made it harder? Is it kind of the same? Like, how has, pastoring as a disciple maker, how has that been different, or how has it impacted just the job side of life for you?
Yeah.
As opposed to before you were a disciple maker?
Yeah, I just celebrated my 17th year here at
Wow.
Grace.
Wow. Congratulations.
That's awesome.
Yeah, which is also St. David's Day, by the way. So nobody celebrates
I don't
that.
know
But
what that is. Yeah.
March 1st, St. David's Day.
Happy to celebrate that with you next year.
It's a big deal for Davids. So
Nice.
yeah. But we, the challenges have been, changing your schedule and your time and your attention. That's hard as a pastor, because there's all the programming and all the giant machine of church that you are expected to maintain and grow, because it's not just about maintaining. So, it's all, everyone wants to see growth.
Mm-hmm.
And so dealing with all those already expectations, but then having to change your schedule around to make it where you have enough bandwidth and time to invest into people one-on-one was a challenge. And it's always, I think, a challenge in our culture. But I'll tell you, it has been a lifesaver in many ways as far as my ministry resilience and my longevity here. if I didn't have my relationships with my guys that I invest in and they invest into me in a sense, like it's a both way street. Boy, I would feel a lot more alone and probably way more burnout than I am. So, yeah.
Amen. Okay, I have one more question for you. But before I ask it, I know that our podcast family is going to want to connect with you. Where can they learn about Centerville Grace, about you, if you have any podcasts that you host? Where can they get all of that information? Listen, this is me leading my lead pastor. This is because I know that he would forget to tell people about the podcast. And so I'm trying to give him a little something.
Man, leading the witness. CentervilleGrace.org, O-R-G, is our website. And there you can find a link to our new Centerville podcast, Centerville Grace podcast, that me, you, and Dusty are doing on a weekly basis, and that just really goes more into in depths of our sermon series that we're doing. But yeah, our website is probably the best place to go.
And you're not really on social media anywhere.
I am not on anywhere on social media. Thank goodness.
You're pretty radio silent.
I love it. It has been new life to me not having to deal with all that.
But the Centerville Grace podcast is really, it's designed to be a discipleship tool to help bridge community and give people something to talk about when they're not sure. So it's just, again, it's not going to make disciples for you, but we're trying to use it as a way so that people who are in dyads or triads can have something to talk about a little bit more intentionally.
Continue the conversation from Sunday.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Okay, last question I wanted to ask you is to give a piece of advice to the young leader, the young church leader who's thinking about stepping out and making disciples, and they're getting ready to start the process of making disciple makers in their church. If you could give them one piece of advice, what are you going to tell them?
Call Justin Gravitt.
He doesn't have any more time for that.
No, but seriously, if you had a Navigator Church ministry partner anywhere near you, I would first try that approach. Having Justin as a resource, as an advisor, he was basically like a part-time staff member for us in many ways. So super helpful. So I would steer them definitely towards the Navigators Church Ministry website and see if there's anybody around them. But if they don't, so I would say just understand that it's going to be a long journey, but a journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step, right? So find someone you can pour into. And chances are, if you are a young pastor, you already know quite a bit about Scripture and about Jesus, and you can, as I think Annie Stanley says it, you can't maybe can't fill somebody's cup, but you can certainly empty yours. And so just the process of pouring into somebody is so life-giving, actually, to yourself. So find somebody, start meeting with them, and you don't have to be a navigator. You don't have to have all these tools, but, open the Scriptures up. Another person said, open Bible, open faith, open life. If you can do those three things with somebody, man, you're already ahead of the game.
Amen. Dave, thank you so much for your willingness to come on today. This was long overdue.
Yeah, I'm glad we got you on here, and it was awesome.
Oh, this is so much fun. I love it. Good.
Well, guys, that's our podcast for today. As always, it is an absolute pleasure to be with each and every one of you. If you need us, don't forget to check out the links in the show notes. We'll put all the links in there. So as always, thank you, and we look forward to connecting with you guys real soon.
Don't you just love Dave? He's just so lovable. Gosh, I'm so thankful to be on his team, and I'm thankful for what God is doing in and through our community. I'd tell you to go follow him on social, but he didn't have any, so there you have it. You can learn more about our podcast, the Centerville Grace podcast. I'll link to it in the show notes. If you want to follow it, it's us going deeper in the message every single week. It's a fun conversation. The three of us, Dave, Dusty, and I, have such a good time doing the podcast. As always, I'm thankful for you, and I'm thankful for our other partners, Trent Barger Real Estate. Also thankful for 5 Star Home Services. Without them, none of this would be possible. Check them out. The links are in the show notes. And as always, guys, I'm thankful for you. If you have questions for me or want to get connected, go to @TWMilt on Instagram or follow the number 2leadcoaching.com on the web. And remember, guys, if you want to follow Jesus, you must be willing to move.